From Eyewitness News, this is Newsmakers.
The calendar says 2022 is still 3 years away, but for Rhode Island political insiders, it already feels right around the corner. With Governor Gina Raimondo barred by term limits from running again, a growing number of Democrats are eyeing a bid, including the state's second highest elected official, Lieutenant Governor Dan McKee. Education has always been a top priority for the former Cumberland mayor, so what does he think of the proposed state takeover of Providence schools, and how would he handle K through 12 if he were in the top job? Our guest this week on Newsmakers, Lieutenant Governor Dan McKee. Welcome to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. Joining me on the program, Eyewitness News reporter Ted Nesi. Lieutenant Governor Dan McKee, thank you very much for joining us on the program. Good to have you back.
Well, thanks for the invite.
We have a lot to talk about, as you heard there. But first, I just want to get your reaction to this. We taped this show on a Friday, and before Ted and I walked into this studio, we were very busy working on a breaking story. We have a little bit of video here of Fall River Mayor Jazel Correa, who was just arrested outside his home. Again, this is a Friday morning that we're talking about this. We know a little bit about it. The feds allege a bribery scandal where he stands accused of many things, including shaking down businesses that wanted to open up marijuana shops in the city for hundreds of thousands of dollars. Governor, you were a mayor, the mayor of Cumberland. When you hear about a case like this, what crosses your mind?
Well, it gives the impression that all these politicians are on the take, and that's not true. So I've dealt with mayors throughout my career that are really outstanding, public servants, and this is just a black eye.
But this isn't the first case, and for people who live in this region, here we go again. Another elected official who has broken our trust. What are people to think when this is yet another case? It feels like a long line of dominoes.
Well, they shouldn't be surprised in Fall River, right? I mean, they had a special election, a recall, and that all that information was out on the table. So the general public, shame on them. They should have made a change at that point in time, in my opinion. Clearly, if someone in Rhode Island was in that type of trouble, you should make a change. And they didn't. So this is not a surprise.
How much do you think this? Again, as someone who's been in politics a long time, seen the good, seen the bad among people getting in trouble, it's inevitable in its human nature. And how much is it with better rules and stuff you can try to avoid? Again, it's all allegations, we should say, but the things we've seen both in Rhode Island and across the border in Massachusetts over the years.
Yeah, there's bad apples in every batch, right? And that's the truth. So you're gonna live with it, but you should hold everybody accountable to a standard that is high, I believe, in terms of public service, and that's the way I've always believed it to be true. In this case, it appears as though that a second chance. The mayor got a second chance, and now he's back in hot water again. So,
again, we tape on a Friday. Yeah. People watching this on a Sunday, but should he step down?
I think he should. I think he should have stepped down the first time, to tell you the truth, because just out of respect for the office, right? Whether he was whether he was fighting it or not, the charges. At some point in time, you just can't manage, and you lose the respect of the people that you need, right? Whether it's in this case a council, or whether it's your department heads, or whether it's the people in your community.
I got to assume too, it would be harder, when you're making the case for federal funding or something, if the mayor is supposed to go make the case and he's under indictment, you're going to have more trouble making those pitches.
Yeah, that's part of the job, right? So if it makes it difficult, if your behavior has got you in a spot where it makes it difficult to do a good job for the people that you're serving, that's time to move on.
Let's talk about education. The state is taking over the beleaguered Providence public schools. Do you support the move?
I do, and I think it's overdue. We've seen and we've known for, this is not new news, this is one of the things that kind of disturbs me, Tim, the fact that we've known that there's problems in our public schools for quite some time. And so the people who have been involved over the last decade or more they've known that the Hispanic learning is at the lowest level in the country, right, for students. They've known that we've had failing, infrastructure in schools and that type of thing. So this is.
Do you lay the blame at those leaders' feet then, the previous mayors that have?
So all I can tell you as a mayor of town of Cumberland, when I was the mayor of town of Cumberland, when I discovered we had 2 failed elementary schools in our town, in town of Cumberland. This was like in 2006, 2007. And we had a high school in total disrepair. We had a middle school in big trouble. We invested $50 million. During the time I was mayor, we invested $50 million in our public schools. So I got in. I called a press conference in the lobby of my high school, my alma mater, Cumberland High School, and said we're going to fix this place. And so so I think you've lacked that leadership in terms of the fact that those schools should be in better shape, right? But that's not really the whole story. The story is the outcomes in the classrooms. And so I think that I believe in that the new commissioner is someone, if they give her the reins, I think that she is going to make some significant improvements over a period of time.
What do you think, I know there's no silver bullet for a large system and decades of problems that have built up there, but are there, 2 or 3 significant steps that you think would make a measurable difference, or things you'll specifically be looking for, actions the commissioner could take in Providence you think would make a big difference?
Well, one of them is to give someone like the commissioner the authority to do what you need to do. That's probably the biggest priority, I believe, right now is to. And then I've always believed that even the work that I did in public schools with the mayoral academies, opening up an office for children, youth, and learning in my community, we're educating kids in our town year-round, right, in that office for children, youth, and learning. We've had over 10,000 kids actually in the seats of those. So when I did that work, I think that what you're trying to do is you're trying to make sure that what's happening there works. And it's clear right now in Providence, Central Falls, I'm out publicly saying that we should be making a governance change in Central Falls. Right? We've worked to Central Falls for so long, and there obviously is not really high level of results there. It's time for leaders to say we didn't get the job done and to try to figure out a way to actually make it work.
It's hard to compare Cumberland and Providence in Central Falls, though. I mean, this problem that Providence is facing is not unique to the city of Providence. Urban centers always have a tough time with the public education there. And you had brought up mayoral academy, so I want to get your opinion on charter schools and the role they could play in the city of Providence. As you know, Mayor Jorge Elorza sits on the Board of Achievement First as his capacity as mayor. You've long been a proponent of charters. He has not supported the expansion of Achievement First in Providence. Is he making a mistake, in your opinion?
Yes, they should. Well, I've been on public saying, look, the schools that the families want to send the kids to, they should open up more seats. That's classical and Achievement First in Providence, right? Classical, you have a waiting list to get into classical. We'll open up more seats there. Families want the kids to go there. So I'm not like this. I'm not like all in. Oh, the charters are the be all and end all. And no, I have been supporting public education, just like I said in the town of Cumberland. We invested $50 million in our schools when I was mayor, right? And our schools today, in Cumberland, are significantly better than they were when we had 2 failed elementary schools. To your point, kids are kids. Right. Yes. Certain communities have a little bit more difficulty in terms of achieving the levels that you need to achieve. But look what's happened at Achievement First. Achievement First was considered the top school in that age group in the state of Rhode Island last year. Those kids are coming from the same neighborhoods that kids that are in schools in Providence that are at proficiencies of 10% or less.
But you've heard the argument here, Governor. What about the kids in the traditional public schools? Of course, under Rhode Island law, charter schools are also public schools,
yes.
But in traditional public schools, when you move a child from a traditional school to a charter school, effectively that money follows the child. But the cost of educating that child, opponents say, does not disappear. You still got to pay for the school buses. You still got to pay for the teacher's salary, even if their classroom goes from 26 to 23 students in that classroom. You still have to pay for the upkeep of the elementary school in Providence, where they lost the money from that child. How do you offset that loss?
You don't have to. you're educating kids. So you've moved kids from one school to another school, and you're educating with the public school dollars. Now, there are school districts in the state that have 20,000 kids in it, and there's school districts that in the state that have 2,000 kids in it. So you adjust that's a management problem. You know, a lot of the issues that have happened in Providence have to do with management, right? They got custodial services that are costing 3 times or 2 or 3 times the cost of what it should be costing in normal city schools. So I think that's a flawed argument.
So do you reject that altogether? Because that is constantly said when we talk about charter schools.
What I find is that things have continued. That's right, constantly said and constantly reported, all of a sudden become true, and yet they're not true. So in Cumberland, for instance, we didn't run any deficits as a result of the mayoral academy. There was no deficit run in our schools. Our schools actually got better, not worse. So the notion that, which is stated in some of the reports recently and along, those kids get hurt by the, in this case, the mayoral academy. No, our kids in our district school got the benefit of the competition. The benefit, they got better. So we should be trying to make our public schools better, and to think that somehow that having funds allocated, distributed differently, it's the same amount of money that's being distributed differently. So if you have to actually reduce your footprint, school districts in the state of Rhode Island have lost, Warwick's lost 1,000 kids over the last, 10, 12 years, right? Newport lost well over 1,000 kids during the time for early 2000s. They need to make adjustments. They didn't have a mayoral academy that did it. So schools expand.
So what you're saying is you might have to close a traditional public
School.
school to open a charter school.
But charter schools are not the only issue that is reducing student counts in districts, right?
No, population is, but
so they should treat it as, look, we have, good management says this is the amount of people that I need to serve. This is how I'm going to serve it, and they actually have long-term plans to do that. So there's a lot of fallacies. You have it was just reported that again that it was going to add $275 million of cost to the Providence schools if Achievement First expanded.
That's what the mayor says.
That's what the mayor says.
Have you done the math?
Well, the mayor, who's on the board of Achievement First, citing an audit from 2016, which is where he gets those numbers. That was an audit, Governor, that had those figures in it.
So, and it gets reported.
Have you done different math?
Of course. $275 million and 2,000 kids is $132,000 a kid, a student. Now, in the report, it reflected that was going to be an annual cost. I don't think it is, but it got reported as an annual cost. But if it was an annual cost, that'd be $132,000 a student. That's not; those numbers don't work. And remember that I think you always have to, and I always did as a mayor, and I certainly do today as a public official. I always dig deep into the numbers, and I want to know where the numbers come from, and I just don't take any numbers at face value. And that's one of the reasons that and any of the data at face value. I don't take that because the people who are trying to generate the data are trying to defend their position, right? And so you need to really push back on this issues. And that's one of the reasons that we're prescribing, and I hope we get to talk about this report card that I want every family, every parent to sign off of in the state of Rhode Island, so they know exactly how good their schools are doing against the grades that are actually being sent home.
Our colleague Eli Sherman reported this week that there were over 10,000 Rhode Island students applied for one of the roughly 1,800 available charter seats this year. In a perfect world, would we have 10,000 charter seats for them?
I don't know whether you need that many, but I do know you need to bring in innovative strategies that until the mayoral academy showed up, right? So you got Blackstone Valley Prep with over 2,000 kids in it, and they're having
that's the biggest charter school in the state,
and they're having
right?
really strong success. Comparing them straight up against all socioeconomic variables. Achievement First is showing the same thing. Rise Prep up in Woonsocket, they've been sued by the local officials to try to stop them from actually operating over the years. I believe that they're going to be one of the absolute top schools when the September scores come out. So do you need? No, you need examples of how to actually get it done, and then you need leadership, and that's why I'm hopeful that the commissioner gets the reins that she needs to do what she needs to do. And I think you're going to find out if she actually digs in deep to all the numbers, both financial and academic, that she's going to turn over some interesting ideas that are going to help those students.
All right, we have to go to a break. We're long overdue. When we come back, we're going to dive into politics, including the lieutenant governor's future. Stay with us. You're watching Newsmakers. Welcome back to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. To my left, Eyewitness News reporter Ted Nesi. Our guest this week is Lieutenant Governor Dan McKee. Governor, before we get into politics, we continued our conversation on education into the commercial break. So
it never stops.
No, and it's an important topic.
Yes.
So I'm glad we spent a lot of time on it. But let's just wrap it up with this question. I'm imagining there are a lot of moms and dads at home. I have 2 kids in public schools. So, we wonder when we hear you talking about charter schools and how great they are and all the test scores are so good. Well, why can't we operate traditional public schools like charter schools so they have that level of education that you're promoting so strongly?
So that's been my goal all along, and we've talked quickly about the fact that Cumberland has improved dramatically since the Mayoral Academy opened up. But I think the missing piece right now is informing parents, actually being honest with families about what's happening in their particular school. Because right now, 90% on a national survey, 90% of families think that their kids are actually reading and doing math at grade level. 90%. We know that's not true in Rhode Island. We know that's not true nationally. Over 80% of the families think they're sending kids to really good schools. But when they see a report card, a school report card, and compare that against the report card that goes home, 40% of those families will change their opinion of their schools. So what I'm proposing is that annually, maybe more than once a year, there's got to be a touch with parents and give them the information. Let them know what the grade proficiencies are in math and reading in their school. Do it in a public meeting. Have the municipal leaders there.
How would that be different than the tests that we get at home when we know that such and such elementary school does well with reading, doesn't do well with math? We get those numbers, those metrics through the statewide testing. How would it be different?
So the difference is, one is that you do it in public with many parents. So when you get your information, you hold on to it. You're not talking to your neighbor about it very much. And you don't compare that against the grades that you're coming home with, right? So when you see the report card you get that the school does, which is scaled, and then the actual test scores that we're starting to get because we're doing similar to Massachusetts, and you see those, you're going to say, there's a big difference here, and you're going to react differently as we've seen in the report. So what I'm saying is you should have this public meeting. You should sign off, Tim, as a parent with your school that you've received this report card. Reading proficiencies, attendance rates, other factors that comparisons to like-kind communities in Massachusetts, to your community, to your school. Do those metrics. What we saw in Cumberland when we started informing parents that didn't know we had 2 failed elementary schools in town, and it was really swept under the rug by the school leadership. When we started informing parents, they changed their behavior, and all of a sudden they became a lot more active in a way that we think has caused a real good improvement. So have that public meeting, and then the parents who don't show up, do another strategy so they have to sign off. Have 100% sign off. Don't do it by district. Do it by school in the state of Rhode Island. That would be a big game changer in the state.
Well, one way you could affect education would be to become the governor of Rhode Island. So let me ask you, are you going to run in 2022?
Yeah, so you're not the first one to ask that.
Yeah, I've heard.
So, and of course, we're looking at it, and if that's a few years, the people that have been supportive of me, right, and which we've had enough support to get elected twice, statewide. So we're looking at. I think that if the conditions are right, and you think you can do a good job, and you think that you can put some things forward that would be helpful to help the economy, for instance, small businesses, that you could help education, which I know that the things that I'm talking about would help education, but we may get some of those things done before then. But and then also the issues that have to do with fiscally and sound communities, right? Safe communities. Those are the things I'm interested in.
When you say conditions, do you mean political conditions? Who else might be running in your party?
I don't think that I would make it based on that, Tim. It would be more, where I believed I was at that time when the decision needed to be made. So right now we're planning to do it, but we haven't made a decision to do it.
When do you think you have to decide to run a competitive campaign?
I would say a couple of years out. I think we got to.
We are a couple of years out.
Right.
Yeah, I know.
I was just doing the math real quick.
I think that after the 2020 election, you'll see some movement. So with many people, I think.
So we don't need to tell you. You had a close call, but you won last fall. A tough primary challenge from former State Rep Aaron Regenberg. I'm curious what lesson you learned from that. That was a very hard-fought campaign. Went down to the wire. What lesson did you take away from that? What did you learn from that campaign specifically?
Well, I think that I really don't think about that as much as saying, we worked really hard and we worked as hard as we could on that, Ted, and we were certainly, that was a different campaign for me. I have never really been experienced a nasty and a dishonest campaign that went on, in that respect. So. I learned that can happen, and then people can believe things that are not true. I'm certainly not a drug dealer. I didn't do certain things that were described of me that I was, enhancing and enabling addiction in the state of Rhode Island. So, so I think we learned that. I learned and I experienced for the first time a relatively dishonest and nasty campaign.
Do you? I'm curious. Few people are more vocal in wanting to make sure you were reelected than Johnston Mayor Joe Policina, an ally of yours. He was outspoken about the need to elect you, partly because he is very opposed to the progressive wing of the party. And I noticed an article in the Sunrise, Johnson Sunrise, recently. He surveyed the Democratic presidential candidates, and Joe Policina said, "quote I don't think I'd vote for any of them. I think they're awful. I really do." What do you think? Do you feel that way about the presidential hopefuls in your party?
No, I don't. And Ray, I support Joe Biden. I think that he's a candidate that can win, and I think he's going to bring in the experience of a very successful administration with the Obama administration. I was the first elected official in the state of Rhode Island that actually came out for President Obama, and I think that when you look and weigh the things that he inherited and where we ended up, you're going to see that that there was a really good performance there, both economically and in every respect. Right?
So you're all in for Biden.
I wouldn't say I'm all in, but right now, if you ask me who I'm supporting, I'm going to support the vice president.
I know we've asked you this question in debates, whatnot, but some people might just be getting to know you right now. We have been talking a lot about a potential run for governor, so I'm going to ask you a couple of questions here. Do you support the legalization of recreational marijuana? No. You don't? Why?
I just think that the verdict is still out in terms of how it impacts young people in particular, and I think that there needs to be a whole lot more analysis. I don't think that we need to be the next one to follow in. I think there's time to kind of take a look and see what's going on in terms of a number of the issues that I think other states are going to have on that one. I think that the medical marijuana, where I think it's been pretty well proven that when people are in pain or they have certain conditions that does help. So I don't oppose that, but I think an expansion of the marijuana. I think we should have certainly a decriminalization of the issue. I don't think that we should be incarcerating people in a way that we have in the past. And I don't think we're doing that as much now. But I think there's two issues there. There's a health issue, and I think there's this legal issue where I think that some people would say, well, we just want to legalize it so that we don't incarcerate as many people. So I think that we need to deal with each one of those separately.
Rhode Island just started mobile sports betting this week. Do you support that? Do you oppose it?
No, I support that.
How come?
I think that that's an activity that we've been involved in. I don't think that it has hurt the state in terms of the casinos that we've had, and I think it's going to be a revenue source that I think that is going to be good, and I think it also positions us as a state competitively right now in a way that gives it a little leg up on the other states, and I think that's a good thing.
Well, staying on gaming, because it's clearly going to be something that the next governor has to think about, and that the current governor does. There's this proposal to extend IGT's contract, state contract for gaming services, by another 20 years. The governor says she's negotiated a good deal, and it'll protect 1,000+ jobs that they currently have here. Two of are strongly opposed to it, and some people have said, I don't know. Where do you come down? Do you think it's a good deal? Do you think that the contract with IGT should be extended?
I think that you're going to see that publicly, right, Ted? That's going to be, in the Senate, the House is going to air that. I think that if everything shows that it's a good deal, then I think we should take it. And but at the same point, I think that we could handle it a little bit differently, right? I think we could have been a little bit more public about it during the negotiations instead of it having been, a surprise to some degree. I think that could be handled better, and I think that IGT, which is one of maybe 3 companies in the country that could, that actually exist in the country that actually could compete for that job. Twin River couldn't bid on that unless they partnered with somebody that could bid on that, right? So I think that in the end, if it all shakes out, that it's a good agreement, and that's what we want to make sure happens. And other states are going through that. With the Lieutenant Governors Association.
About 10 seconds left.
Yeah, other states are doing the same thing. We're going forward on these issues. You just want to make sure that they're the best agreement.
Lieutenant Governor Dan McKee, thanks very much for joining us. If you missed any of it, it's online, WPRI.com. We'll see you next week on Newsmakers.